Hi, I'm Josh Rushing, filling in for Me OK, and you're in the stream. Today, terminally ill children in Belgium may soon be able to choose ending their own lives. Are these euthanasia laws compassionate or creating a culture of death? Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for your live feedback. Malika, today's a tough one. It's a real moral dilemma I've been turning in my head for the last 24 hours. What's the community think about it?
Well, you're definitely not the only one. And we're asking whether this is an act or can be an act of compassion or whether it creates a culture of death. And our community seems to say it depends. There's a tweet here from Hannah who says, I don't think it should be permitted at all. It's equivalent to committing murder no matter how severe the case is. But on the other hand, Jessica tweets in, if the patient is living with a debilitating, unchangeable condition and are informed about the process, it's their choice. Of course, we want to hear from all of you at home as well, so join the conversation using hashtag AJStream.
Thanks, Malika. Joining us on set is Dr. Paul Saba. He is the co-chair of the Coalition of Physicians for Social Justice. Thank you, Doctor, for being here today. Now, we'll get to the conversation in just a minute, but first, have you followed the stream on Instagram? Check it out. It's at instagram.com/AJStream. You can see these great pictures, and the stream of the week is finally back. So you can follow this, and in fact, here are some other hashtags that we're following. Belgium's parliament will soon debate expanding euthanasia laws to include children under the age of 18 and adults with the diagnosis of Alzheimer's as long as they request it in the early stages of the disease. The expanded law is likely to pass as most people in the country actually support euthanasia. Now, Belgium will be the first country to legalize euthanasia for children of any age in cases of unbearable and irreversible suffering. The country recorded a record number of more than 1,400 cases in 2012. That's up 25% from the previous year. And in fact, euthanasia accounts for more than 1% of all deaths in Belgium. Euthanasia was adopted in 2002 with the goal of helping the incurable escape physical or mental suffering. So what are the implications, and is choosing death a human right? In our Google Plus Hangout, we have Roel Nolet, who made a documentary film called Nathan, Free as a Bird, and Tom Mortier, a lecturer at Leuven University College. His mother chose euthanasia in 2012 after suffering from a lifelong battle with depression. All right, so let's begin with Dr. Saba. This is actually, so you're out of Quebec, right? And this is an issue that they're considering in Quebec as well,
yes,
right?
very, very strongly. What it is the doctors have been, and the government have been pushing this. Why is it the doctors and the government pushing? Well, there's an interest. Doctors, for example, if they euthanize somebody, they don't have to be accountable for what they did. You have the case in Belgium where the patient was euthanized after Nathan after a botched sex surgery. So doctors get rid of their mistakes. People say it's for compassion. The Germans in 1938 said that they started the T4 program, very similar to what's going on in Belgium. It started off for severely, incurably handicapped children, and it was done for compassionate reasons, so there would be less of a burden to the family as well as to the state. 3,000 to 5,000 children were euthanized under that program. There was protests. It went underground. You know the rest of the story.
So
in fact, the
difference, though, with the T34 program is that was from the government, right? This is putting the decision in the hands of the people, like Nathan, who you brought up.
Initially, the first requests were done by families. In fact, Hitler did it out of compassion because he said there was a request for a child. The family was overburdened. The child had a handicap, and that's how it started. They actually set up a committee. It was supposed to be with parental consent. It was supposed to be 3 independent doctors. In fact, if you can use the word ethical, it was more ethical than the Belgian or the Quebec model. And they actually had a committee including citizens. So it started off very ethically, if you can use the word ethical for euthanasia, and then it just went down to where they were euthanizing children without parents' request. over 100,000 psychiatric patients, and you know the rest of the story.
Right. Okay, well, look, so you bring up Nathan.
Yes.
There's actually been a film made about Nathan. It's called Nathan Frees a Bird. We have the filmmaker joining us today, Roel Nolet. I'd like to set up this clip. This is about Nathan, who was going through a transgender procedure. It did not go well, and so he chooses euthanasia. Let's look at the clip.
En sommigen zullen denken van, de Nathan is een opgever. Oké. Kan misschien best zijn, maar niemand zit in mijn gevoel en niemand weet wat ik voel dagelijks en hoe hard het voor mij iedere keer een gevecht is. Dus dan denk ik dat je op een gegeven moment eerlijk moet zijn ten opzichte naar jezelf en elke dag lijden en elke dag pijn hebben. En kapot gaan van verdriet en noem maar op. Nou, ik denk dat dat voor niemand leefbaar is. Ik beslis over mijn leven. En niemand moet mijn beslissingen respecteren. Doen ze het, oké, doen ze het niet, ook goed. Dus,
Roel, I know you told me that you followed him for 3 years. It must have been tough following someone going through that kind of decision. And I'm also told, and tell me if I'm wrong here, that you went into it against the idea of euthanasia and then came out of it with a different perspective. Can you explain that to me?
I think I never said that actually, but it's true that Nathan he said it. He said 3 years ago already. There are two options for me: either I change, I become the man I want to be, or I'll end my life, or I die. That are the two options. I never thought he would do that. When he said it 3 years ago, I never thought he would do it or he would make that decision. But he had the option to do it, and he chose to do it because, yeah, he had that idea in mind to do it, and he thought this is my decision, and it was his plan to do it, I think.
How did that affect the way you view euthanasia?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm not going to say that I'm pro all the way, maybe, but that when I look at the story of Nathan, I think he had the unbearable psychic suffering somehow.
Huh.
I don't say that there are no other options for him, but he made the decision at that point of unbearable psychic suffering to end his life, and there was a legal option, and he took it. I don't know if we can say that was a wrong decision.
But Tom
At that
Kieran,
moment in his life, maybe it was the best decision for him.
Right. And Roel, what you're saying, I'd like Tom Kieran to pick up on, because you mentioned something that Nathan told you, which is, this is my decision. What our community seems to be picking up on is the children aspect of it, and can they make that decision? There's a tweet here from Mo who says, the discussion on a child's right to die is sensitive but needs to be addressed. I ask, is a 5-year-old capable of making that choice? There's also a video comment here asking a little bit more of a nuanced question. Tom Kieran, have a listen to this.
Hey, Al Jazeera. Long-standing respected research in childhood cognitive development tells us that children are unable to fully understand, fully grasp the consequences of their decisions, big or small. Therefore, placing a decision like this, a life or death decision of permanent consequence, even with parental consent, I think is both socially and medically irresponsible.
So Tom, of course, you're the European coordinator for Exit International based in Ireland. What are your thoughts on children having the right to make that kind of choice?
Well, I think it's a very difficult one. Personally, I think it should be confined to adults who are rational, which brings up the other issue that is in Belgium today as well. But personally, I do not feel that children should have the right, nor do parents have the right to make it. It is something that's a very personal decision. It's something that's a very individual decision. I do fully respect that every adult, every rational adult, has a right to make a decision for themselves. And I don't believe that we as a society have the right to tell a person that they should have to live on in pain if that is against their wishes. I don't believe that we have the right to make that decision for them. So I'm totally against euthanasia. But I'm absolutely in favour of voluntary euthanasia, where the person makes the decision themselves.
Tom Mortier, do you have a response to Tom Curran? Should everyone have the right to end their own life if they choose to?
I'm just going to talk about my own experience, of course. I mean, my father committed suicide, so that's first. When I was 5 years old, 2 years after their divorce, my mother and my father, they divorced, and after that, 2 years after the divorce, my father committed suicide. My mother, she had many depressions her whole life. However, she loved to travel, she loved to read, and all of those things. However, she had a new relationship. It lasted 10 years, and after this relationship, when this relationship ended, it's about 2 years before her death, she came again in her depression, and 1 year and a half before her death, she said to me that I was just like my father, and she rejected me, and there wasn't any contact anymore. And on the 19th of April last year, my mother was euthanized. I didn't know anything about it. And on the 20th of April, I had an email from my wife at school that I had to phone to the hospital because my mother was dead. In the evening, I went to the mortuary. They gave me a paper where everything was standing, what I had to do as a son. I had to arrange everything. I had to fill in the papers. I had to let her body transported from the mortuary to the service of anatomy, because my mother, she gave her body to science, so I even couldn't have a funeral. In 1 year probably her body will be released. So in fact, okay, maybe it's her choice, but I didn't choose this. I mean, we had a small kid, my wife and I, for half a year old. We have 2 beautiful children, 3 beautiful children we have now.
Tom, what was the emotional toll of all this on you?
What do you say?
What was the emotional toll of going through this experience on you?
In fact, what they created was really as an unbearable suffering for me now. I mean, this is really suffering what I feel, and it's every day. I mean, my father chose death, my mother chose death, and this is in fact, this is a suicide. This isn't euthanasia anymore. This is suicide. This is just suicide. This is absolutizing the self-determination or whatsoever. This is just suicide. I mean, one day, 19th of April, my mother, she had her lethal injection, and the next day I have to phone to the hospital. I mean, this is insanity, in fact.
This brings up a really interesting point, Tom, when we're talking about euthanasia, and we're not talking about it with a terminal disease. We're talking about by choice when one is like going through a depression. So let's go back to the film. This is Nathan Free as a Bird.
Could I just say there something? This is Tom Curran.
Yeah, jump in.
Who are we to say that emotional pain is any less than physical pain?
I mean, my father committed suicide.
Hold on a sec now. You had a reasonable amount of time to talk.
Let Tom Curran jump in here.
What right do we have to say that a person's emotional pain is not as severe as somebody else's physical pain? And if we're talking about personal situations, I'm not going to talk about that particular situation because I fully respect the pain that Tom is going through. But in my situation, my partner has terminal MS. She is in the final stages of MS, and she has decided that if the MS becomes unbearable, she will not want to continue. And I have said that I will help her. Now, with me helping her, it has meant that she's been able to live beyond the point where she could take her own life. So she got extra years in life by me offering to help her, although it's quite illegal in our country. But I will miss her. I don't want her to go. I will be hurt. But I respect and love her enough that I will help her to die if that's what she wants.
But Tom, isn't there a distinction?
Of course there'll be pain for me there afterwards, but I have to respect it's her wishes.
Well, Tom Curran, isn't there a distinction, though, between the fact that your partner has MS and someone who is perhaps suffering through depression? I mean, the difference between severity, which you bring up, and being terminal, are two different things.
I don't know the difference. I'm not in a position to make a judgment on the difference between emotional hurt and emotional pain. Now, it may or may not go away. It may be treatable. I'm not a medical professional. But I don't feel that we have the right as a society to insist that a person goes through pain if they don't want to. I don't think we have the right to take their pain away without their wishes, which is euthanasia. But if they wish themselves to end their pain, I don't think that we as a society have a right to stop them.
Yeah, I think you're missing the whole point of what pain control is and alleviating suffering. Alleviating suffering is not euthanasia. Euthanasia is the final solution. The Germans practice that. The Belgians are practicing it now. In Quebec, they want to practice that. Let me just finish. Let me finish. I gave you time. I empathize with you. I have a patient who's actually on a ventilator with Lou Gehrig's disease. He has chosen to live. He's got good support. Lots of people with disabilities, diseases have been abandoned. They're not getting the support. People in Quebec, 80% of our population does not have access to palliative care for suffering, for severe suffering. We need to improve the quality of care that we're providing to people in Quebec. I don't believe is any different than the rest of the world. We need to ensure that people who are really at the end of life have palliative care. And those who are at the end of life, when they're in distress, we have distress protocols where they increase the dose of medication. It's not euthanasia, it's to alleviate suffering.
But you're talking about physical disease.
Yes,
can depression be a terminal disease?
I have patients who come in, I've worked in the emergency room who've made suicide attempts. We put them on preventive guard, which means that they're kept under watch for 48 hours. We do everything to prevent them from killing themselves. If it really comes up to a question, what is the value of human life? Do we give a value to the life, or do we give complete value to this idea of autonomy, where a person wants to kill themselves, they can kill themselves? This is, I think, is an essential question. And the problem is when you go down the road to autonomy, as they have done in certain places like Oregon, I won't talk about that because we're for folks, but other countries, what has happened is that the doctors and the administrators have taken measures to basically to eliminate. This is clearly shown that doctors have gone into nursing homes. There's a study in the British Medical Journal, which and the Canadian Medical Journal, which talks about physician-assisted suicide in Canadian Medical Journal 2010, and where it talks about half the cases of euthanized patients are not even have not given informed consent. They have not agreed to it. So, you know, are we really giving people the right? Or are we letting doctors have a free rein to kill their patients? And then when you get back to informed consent, can somebody who's really severely depressed, and 60% of patients who have been euthanized in Europe are depressed, and the majority of them have not had psychiatric or psychological evaluations.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I'm seeing a lot of people who are picking up on what you're saying. Joseph here says euthanasia should be granted to people in only very severe cases. You shouldn't kill someone simply because he's depressed, but that's one person's view. Tom Mortimer, I want to go to you now, because I pulled up your article here that you wrote after the death of your mother, How My Mother Died, and in it you have a line here, a really poignant question, where you say, how do we judge what unbearable suffering is? What are the criteria? Before you answer that, I want to pull this up from Facebook. Dennis says, if after several second opinions from doctors there seems to be no end in sight for the suffering, and the child or the parents really would like that person to die, then those wishes should be respected. So do you see this at all as a case of your mother's wishes were respected?
I talked to the doctor who euthanized my mother, and he said he was absolutely certain my mother didn't want to live anymore. He was absolutely certain. I asked this doctor, can I see the medical file of my mother? And he wouldn't allow this. So I asked a doctor to see this file. And now I know that my mother died because of one psychiatrist who said to this doctor, yes, she can be helped with her dying process. So she can be helped with dying. And so there were two other reports from psychiatrists, but they were saying this euthanasia request is immature, and the other one didn't agree. So in fact, what my mother did was a kind of a shopping in euthanasia. You just have to find a doctor who wants to euthanize you, so help you with your suicide, in fact.
Your
so
story.
My mother was Yeah.
Your story makes me think of the film Nathan Free as a Bird, and part of the film deals with the fact of how those around Nathan are dealing with the decision that he's made. Let's watch this clip.
Soms heb ik eigenlijk ook wel best het gevoel, of wil ik eigenlijk misschien alleen sterven, omdat ik grotendeels van mijn leven eigenlijk wel alleen ben geweest. Maar aan de andere kant is dat inderdaad niet fair ten opzichte naar de mensen toe die nou heel dicht bij mij in de buurt staan en die ik blijkbaar zonder dat ik het eigenlijk wel wil.
So, Roel, watching your film, if someone came away with the impression that what Nathan did was in some ways selfish because of all the pain and suffering that it caused those around him, how do you respond to that?
Maybe it was. Nathan saw this as a thing that he did for himself. He said, I can't live for the people around me anymore, although I would want to live for them. And I haven't felt so much warmth in the last couple of weeks and months of all the people that surround me now and who are trying to convince me to go on with my life. But he said, I cannot live even when there are a lot of these people around me, even when they try to convince me. First, these people, they tried to convince him to live on. Afterwards, they started to support him, because they thought maybe when we support him, maybe when we let him see that there is love in his life, there are people who care about him, maybe then he takes a decision not to do it. So first they tried to convince him with words. Afterwards they were like, okay, we respect your choice, and maybe they thought along the way he would change his mind, but he didn't. So they supported him till the last second, and yeah, he had the lethal injection, and that was it.
So Tom Karam, when we're looking at euthanasia with people that are dealing with depression can come and go. It's not terminal. You can feel better in 2 years, and perhaps you have a lapse down the road, as I understand it. So is it that they're choosing a permanent solution to what could be a temporary problem that they're going through?
That is the choice that they make themselves. And there are always people that are going to suffer when somebody else dies, whether they die naturally or by the disease itself. But the suffering that people can endure depends entirely on themselves. And we should respect their view as to what they want to put up with. We don't have, and I keep stressing this, we don't have the right to tell a person that their life is worthwhile or it's not worthwhile. And this is where the personal decision comes in. We don't have the right to say, you should live on because it's going to hurt me if you die. That is selfish.
Is it less about the right and more about whether doctors should be able to participate in this?
No, I think it really comes down to value. What is human life? What is the value? For me, human life, and for many people, it's being able to care and be cared for, to love and be loved. And it's not the utility or usefulness of life that matters. And we've advanced far from the days of the Romans, where in the Colosseums the life was determined by the people in the Colosseum to vote, where suicide was considered an alternative. We've advanced to where each and every human life is of value, and we need to
cut you off there. Yes. I hate to do it, but we're actually about to end the show. We are going to continue this discussion in the online post-show. So go to stream.aljazeera.com to hear the rest of the doctor's thoughts, and for about 10 more minutes of discussion on this. I'm into it. All right, the next show, Femi will actually be back here in the driver's seat, so good for you. And they'll be talking about putting a price tag on the legacy of slavery. They'll look at the Caribbean's ongoing campaign to demand reparations from former European colonizers. Until then, we'll see you online. Hey, welcome back to the Post Show. All right, on today's program, we're talking about the implications of expanding current euthanasia laws in Belgium, and I want to get right back to the discussion. You were just talking about the value of life. You were bringing in the state into the discussion, bringing up the Romans. You know, I think about in the U.S., you have about 4 out of the 50 states will allow some form of euthanasia, and the others don't. So in the vast majority of the U.S., you do not have the right to end your own life, and yet we have the federal death penalty in the U.S. So we live in a state in the U.S. where the state can take your life, but it says you don't have the right to take your life.
I live in Canada where the death penalty has been abolished, and the reason it was abolished is because the danger that one innocent life would be lost. And when we're looking at euthanasia, we're talking about thousands and thousands of lives. Innocent, when I say innocent, it's people who were euthanized against their will, people who were depressed, who didn't get the support. I'm very touched by the story of Nathan. It sounded like at the end he had surrounded by lots of warmth and love.
Yeah.
This should have been his whole life. When I read the story about him and you read stories about other people who've ended tragically, many times they were abused, they were isolated, they were mistreated, abused psychologically, physically, sexually. I have lots of patients.
Nathan fits that profile as well. He had suffered abuse as a child.
I have lots of patients who've been abused, and I can tell. I can see when they come in. You know, for many reasons, they have low self-esteem. Many times they don't take care of themselves. They have issues of anger and violence. And when you get down to what happened to them, it's not that they just became like that overnight, is they were abused. And you know, lots of these people would choose euthanasia. Lots of these people can't hold steady jobs. They're on Social Security.
And you don't think they should have the right to choose euthanasia?
Absolutely not, because you know,
but it's their life.
Yeah, we do everything to protect human life. You know, we ensure
don't you feel
that
like you're encroaching upon their life.
Then in that case, let's get rid of Obamacare. Because why was Obamacare put in? And it's been a big debate in the United States, because we feel that people should be cared for. They should have access to health care. We believe in providing people with, because they're our fellow human beings. We don't live alone or isolated. It takes a village to raise a child, and the village to raise it, not kill the child. And what we do as a society and how we treat the most vulnerable, our children, our elderly, our disabled. Our history would be far worse. In the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt suffered from polio, but he got the United States through the worst time in history in terms of depression and the Second World War. You have many people. Helen Keller, my daughter said, Eliane, I'll mention her here. She said, Paul, Daddy, talk about Helen Keller. She's been reading. She was, at the age of 2, she was blind, deaf, and mute, and yet she made a tremendous contribution to people's lives.
The two don't have to be mutually exclusive. We shouldn't stop looking after people if they want to be looked after, but we should also give people the choice if they don't want to continue. I fully respect the views of everybody, those who want to live and those who don't want to live. And society is definitely neglecting the people who do want to live. But that shouldn't mean that we don't give the choice to the people who don't want to.
People can choose
who decide that they've had enough suffering.
People can stop to eat, they can stop to drink.
There's also a kind of a responsibility you have to take. My mother never took her responsibility. She never took her responsibility for me. And
responsibility to what? Responsibility to herself or responsibility to you?
Also to her children. I mean, why are you putting children on this world? Why am I here? Why are you putting children on this world? I mean, she said to me 2 years before her death, I will be a very good grandmother. I brought her her grandchildren. I said, please, here they are. I mean, but she never did. First you have responsibility, and then maybe you can make some choices, but you also have to take your own responsibilities.
Tom, I think is bringing up a good point.
I fully accept your pain, and I do empathize with you completely. But at the same time, it's your mother's choice.
I don't have a choice.
I think we should respect her choice.
Then eventually people won't have choice.
I can't. I mean, I wasn't even involved in the whole decision process. I wasn't even involved in the whole decision process. How can I respect her choice? I mean, you're saying I have to respect her choice. I mean, she was just death. I mean, I had to do everything. I had to arrange everything.
And the doctors didn't follow the rules in this case, and the doctors abused their privilege.
I find it very difficult to get involved in a personal case when I'm talking to a person with such hurt.
But you're also here from a personal case. I mean, you're saying I'm here from a personal case. I mean, of course you're here from a personal case.
Let's take a time out and bring Rule back into the conversation.
What are you saying? Choice is an illusion.
Let's take a time out, and I want to bring Rule back into the conversation. Rule, are you still there?
I'm here.
You know, in watching your film, I was struck by really just kind of on a deep philosophical level. what is the purpose of this life if one can choose to end it the way he did for the reasons he did? Like, why were you struck by that? Why are we here, and what do we do with our lives? What did you come away with?
When making the documentary about Nathan, yeah, you think a lot of things, of course. You see people around him crashing, really, people who want him to live on, but at the same time they respect what he wants to do, because they understand that it's his choice, and he took all he did all the arrangements for his own funeral.
Roel, do you feel like he felt like he had no purpose on this earth? Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you feel like he had no purpose on this earth other than going from being a woman to become a man?
For him, Nathan was very focused, of course, on his transition. For him, when the transition ended, everything ended. But that was maybe there was a stage. Maybe that was a stage. Maybe when he had pushed through, maybe something had changed. But for him, there was no other option at that point. He said, "Okay, now it's over. Now I'm done with it. Now it's complete." And he couldn't turn back. Also, he had made some very.
You know, we're talking a lot about choice, and the topic of choice has come up among all of our guests here today. And I want to bring this in from Brian on Facebook, who chimes in on that. He says, just as no one has the right to force someone to die when they would choose to live, no one has the right to force someone to live when they would choose to die. But on the other hand, Tom Mortimer, we got a video submission from someone who looked at your mother's file. This is George, and he determined that your mother, what he says, did not have to be euthanized. I'd like all of our guests to have a listen to this.
Cette évolution est une évolution inquiétante qui est montrée chaque fois dans les journaux également par des cas tout à fait exceptionnels, comme des cas de transformation, quelqu'un qui a voulu transformer son sexe par la chirurgie plastique, qui n'est pas content et qui se fait euthanasier. Une fille de 25 ans qui, avec anorexie mentale, qui est violée par son psychiatre et qui se fait euthanasier. Nous voyons donc toujours cette même évolution sous l'idée que chacun a le droit à l'autodétermination. Nous voyons cette même évolution vers des situations tout à fait extrêmes où, en fin de compte, tout le monde aura le droit à l'euthanasie, quelle qu'en soit la raison.
Tom, of course, you're the best person to pick up after that. You heard George say in French, of course, that this evolution is a worrisome one. Is that your feeling as well?
It's really very scary. I mean, the main euthanasia doctor in Belgium, he is even the chairman of the Federal Commission who has to watch over the euthanasia cases. So that's really very worrying. He is making propaganda of euthanasia. In fact, we can almost speak of a euthanasia program in Belgium. I mean, you can go to a town hall to get some papers to fill in to be euthanized. You can now have a card, like a bank card or something, I don't know.
Tom Mortimer, let me ask you this. Are you implying that the government is pushing euthanasia because it's cheaper in a country that has socialized medicine?
I'm not speaking about economic reasons. I'm just talking about the things which are going on here. I mean, there are even foreigners who are coming to Belgium now who are being euthanized. I mean, I know from 5 people who were euthanized in 2012, coming from United States, Austria, the Netherlands, and so on. But what I do want to point out is that it is really a very scary thing what is going on. It's really propaganda what they are doing here in Belgium. It's constantly in the media. It's constantly normalizing euthanasia. I mean, even the filmmaker Roel Nollet filmed the euthanasia of Nathan Verhelst. I mean, you can see a doctor euthanizing his patient, and everyone is sitting around, and we are just watching the suicide. So now I know, maybe it was in the same room, how my mother died at her last moments.
I'm sure that's hard to watch. I wanted to go to Tom Curran one more time, but we don't have time. We're in the final seconds of the program here. So let's continue this discussion on Twitter. Include us in at AJ Stream, include me in at Josh Rushing. Tomorrow, Femi will be back in this chair. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. She'll be looking at the price tag of slavery, trying to get some of the Caribbean countries are trying to get reparations from former European colonizers. I hope you enjoy the show, and until then, well, we'll see you online.